Hopefully it'll work. Just go ahead and click to the first one, yeah. We'll see if this works. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. All right, so as we've done at the beginning of each of these sermons in this series, let's read the dream out loud together, and then we'll jump right in, shall we? Okay, we dream that KCPCH and therefore ARCHE will raise up a movement of prayer that would see transformation through the church, throughout Houston, throughout Texas, throughout the nation, and throughout the world. And today we're going to just begin by reading scripture together. The scripture comes from Luke chapter 18, verse 1 through 8. It'll be on the screen for you. But if you have your Bibles, I would highly encourage you to open it up and read from there. But Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. And I encourage you to read aloud with me. Let's read together. Now he was telling them a parable to show that at all times they ought to pray and not to lose heart, saying, in a certain city there was a judge who did not fear God and did not respect man. There was a widow in that city, and she kept coming to him, saying, give me legal protection from my opponent. For a while he was unwilling, but afterward he said to himself, even though I do not fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will give her legal protection. Otherwise, by continually coming, she will wear me out. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge said. Now, will not God bring about justice for his elect who cry to him day and night, and will he delay long over them? I tell you that he will bring about justice for them quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let me just begin by bearing the lead, aka giving it away and telling you the meaning of the parable, just like Luke and Jesus do in the parable. The meaning of the parable is stated in verse 1, as you see on the screen. This parable is supposed to teach us that Christians should never lose heart, but rather keep praying, and in parentheses, you can add, no matter the circumstance. Okay? And then if you couple this with the question that Jesus asked at the end, as you see on the screen, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? And then you throw in the fact that the widow is without a shadow of a doubt the picture of someone who does not lose heart, but rather keeps on praying. Then what Jesus wants to know clearly is when he returns in his second coming, will he find this type of Christian? Will this be the church that he finds? If we're using the language from our dream today, when Jesus returns, will he find faith that's exemplified by a prayer movement that did not lose heart, but kept on praying no matter the circumstances? Will he find such people? And to be clear, the way that this sentence is written in Greek, there's a Greek construction that you can use where the question itself is open-ended in the sense that he's asking the question, and it is definitively possible that the answer is no, he will not find such people. So then you can say, basically, Jesus is saying, don't assume that I will find such faith when I return. Or, put it this way, don't assume that Jesus will find as much faith or faithful people as we might think he will. If we want to make it personal to us and apply the parable then to us, then it will say, will Jesus find this faith in me? Is that the type of faith that he finds in me right now? Now you might be wondering and saying, wait, Pastor Pete, hold up one second. This dream that we read out loud together is supposed to be about prayer and not faith. What are you doing? Well, hopefully, as we will see as we go through this parable, Jesus is actually telling us that faith is very intricately and intimately tied to prayer. Put this way, the quality of one's faith can be understood by the health of one's prayer life. My professor in school taught it to us this way. He says, faith, genuine faith, living faith, is revealed most clearly, is manifested most clearly, is expressed most clearly in not giving up in prayer. I was taught all the time in seminary that the world is chiefly transformed, most transformed by those who continually fall to their knees and pray. Now, John Piper, thankfully, gives us a great example of how this faith and prayer thing come together. And this is what he says. He says, faith is the furnace of our lives. That's the old school heater in the middle of the room that you feed the fire to. Fuel for the fire is grace, and prayer is the shovel that feeds the fuel to the furnace. Now, this may not make sense to all the young people in here because they've never seen a furnace in their life. And so for me, the way I thought about it, I think everything in terms of food terms. And for me, I thought of barbecue, naturally. So faith, if you look here, is this pit smoker. And if you don't know what this is how they smoke the barbecue. This is the firebox. That's where they put all the fire. And then the smoke goes from here, wafts over all the delicious food in here, and then comes out the chimney. Okay? So that's faith, is the smoker box that produces beautiful Texas-style brisket Fruit is the delicious brisket and other meats that will come out of the brisket, out of the pit. Grace is the fuel that keeps the cook going, the smoke and the heat and so on and so forth. And then prayer is the shovel that takes the embers and places them in the smoke box. This is a picture, or multiple pictures of Tootsie, who is the legendary pitmaster at Snow's Barbecue in Lexington, Texas. She's been doing this for 50 years, apparently. I have to go. I haven't yet found time to go. If you want to go with me, let me know. Apparently it's something that I must do before I die, or more importantly, before she passed away, because again, she's quite old. Hopefully she lives a long time. But if you see here, this little shovel, not so little, apparently she's had for decades, and that's the shovel. She takes the embers from here, the burning fire, and then she carries it real legendary-like into the firebox, and that's what gives the smoke and the fire for the barbecue to cook. Basically, no prayer means no smoke and no heat equals bad brisket, and then the barbecue pit is essentially useless, which would be a shame. So then Piper says this: prayer and faith stand and fall together. If we lose heart and drift away from prayer, then the Son of Man will not find faith in us when he comes. The key to a living and breathing relationship with God is that we are continually asking God in prayer to hallow his name, to bring his kingdom, and to do his will on earth as it is in heaven. That no matter what is happening in life, and perhaps the most, especially when things are not going our way, which is a lot of the times, that we would keep on praying. Because in life, what I find is prayer is the only thing you can do at all times of your life, good, bad, and or ugly. So that's what this prayer is about. Our dream is about this, that we would not lose heart and keep on praying. But there's so much more, so let's dive in, shall we? Here's the game plan: context, character, conclusions. One by one, let's go. First, the context. Now, Jesus speaks this parable right before he's about to enter into Jerusalem, just before he's going to go to the cross. So again, that's what he has on his mind, and it's in his vision, okay? Now, this parable, interestingly, is part of a larger section from chapter 17, verse 22, down to 18:8. And we know this because 17, 22 to 37, Jesus is talking about the end times, when he is going to return. He says things like, days of the Son of Man, when the Son of Man is revealed. And then if you couple that with the question that we read earlier at the end of the parable, when the Son of Man returns, will he find such faith on the earth, is to show you that this is actually one long section that's meant to be understood together. Now, in the section from chapter 17, 22 to 18:1, Jesus tells us about the end times. And he says things like, one, we're not going to see the end times coming. Like, you're not going to be able to know it, so kind of stop trying. But then, interestingly, he gives us some clues about what the end times are going to be like, but honestly, the clues aren't actually all that helpful. In verse 26, he says, the end times are going to be like the days of Noah. 28, it's going to be like the days of Lot, where they were eating, drinking, marrying, being given in marriage before the flood. Verse 28, when they were eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, and building. Now, if you go back to the Old Testament sections of the days of Noah and Lot, we know that they weren't good times. God was not pleased. But interestingly, the way Jesus talks about these times are through things that on their own are not sinful at all, right? Drinking, eating, getting married, buying and selling things, planting things, building things are all very normal things that all of us would do every single day. People in those days would do it all the time. And in and of themselves, they're not very sinful. And so on one hand, the end times are going to be very normal, he's saying. But on the other hand, he also teaches throughout the section that the end times are going to include suffering and persecution that the disciples will endure for following him. And so what Jesus is trying to do, I think, is this. He's teaching us that losing heart and therefore not praying can happen in a multiple different ways. We can lose heart definitively, of course, when life is particularly difficult in seasons of suffering and despair, right? But he's saying in those times, do not lose heart, but keep praying. But also, what he's teaching us, I think more importantly, and perhaps we need to realize, is that more dangerous to us is not when life is hard, but when life is normal. Or even more, when life is going great. Do not lose heart. You see, and this is critical, that Jesus teaches actually through this, but also another place, wonderful things of life can make us just as insensitive and indifferent to God as the wicked things of life. Let me repeat that, okay? The wonderful things of life can make us just as insensitive and indifferent to God as the wicked things of life. Right? It's the prayer in Proverbs 30. Right? Don't give me too much so I think I don't need you, but don't give me so little that I'm going to want to steal. That's the idea. Or I can put it like this. We are perhaps just as likely to become numb to God by the normal and the mundane things of life, just as we are by the nasty and mortifying things of life. Both are just as dangerous to us as the other. John Piper again says this: if you are not praying, then you are quietly confident that time, money, and talent are all that you need in life. You'll always be a little too tired and a little too busy to pray. But if, like Jesus, you realize that you cannot do life on your own, then no matter how busy, no matter how tired you are, you will find time to pray. When life gets busy and chaotic, but also when life is really great, what's often the first thing that goes? It's disciplined prayer. So this parable is all about not losing heart and continuing to always pray in the ordinary, in the outstanding, and also in the outrageous. And if you put it like that, then it seems in some ways that when Jesus returns, he's going to find out that many indeed have lost heart and stopped praying and therefore lost faith. And to drive home this point, after saying this in chapter 17, he then speaks this parable. And that's why he says it, okay? So then let's move to the parable itself and the characters. Now, allow me to quickly explain why parables are used by Jesus so often and why they're important, okay? Because Jesus uses them a lot. Now, in speaking parables, Jesus is basically saying this: hey, I'm going to tell you a story, an analogy, that's really easy to understand so that you won't be confused, okay? Think like tortoise and the hare. Everyone know that story? If you don't, go ask somebody. You should know this story, right? And the idea of the tortoise and the hare is very simple. You should know the story. It's easy to understand. And the moral is easy to get, right? Everything is easy to follow, right? Nothing is hard. But with parables, Jesus is saying, while the story on the surface may seem to be easy to follow, easy to understand, the point of the parable is actually meant to get you to think and go, wait, just a minute. Did he just say what I thought he just said? That's the idea of a parable. The idea of a parable is to drive home the idea that though I thought I knew, I actually had no idea. So if you're listening to a parable, reading a parable, what you should think, and if you're thinking this, it means you actually get it, is to go, wait a minute, I did not see that coming. Wait, what is going on? And if you read a parable and you go, oh, wait, oh, yeah, that's easy, I get it. It means you actually most likely have zero idea what's going on. That's why Jesus says in Luke 8, when he tells his first parable, though they saw, they did not see, and though they heard, they did not hear. And so with this parable, the idea is what you think you know isn't actually what you know. So not losing heart and continually praying isn't what you thought it was, so think again. That's the background. So then let's get to these characters, shall we? First, the widow. Widows, unfortunately, in those society, in those days, were some of the most vulnerable persons in the world. And it's because in those days, apologies to the ladies, a woman's place in life was determined by a man. So for instance, a young girl was determined by her father who protected and provided for her. A married woman was determined by her husband who protected and provided for her. And a widow was determined by a son who protected and provided for her. But this widow has none of those things. The father's protection and provision, gone long time ago. She has no husband. She's a widow. And we find out that she does not have any sons. Why? Because she is in a courtroom all by herself, speaking for herself, which in those days would not have happened if she had a son. And if you come to think of it, if you just kind of think, just put it all on equal, this woman is actually kind of crazy. She's out there in some ways. She is a defenseless woman in a courtroom where no one would actually listen to her, arguing to a judge who is a man about most likely another man who has wronged her. And so this widow is not your normal, right, widow, normal everyday woman. But another thing that you cannot miss about this widow is that not only does she not have a man to protect her, she also has no money to fight for her cause. You see, in those days, the easiest and the surest way to get a judge to help you was to bribe him. They loved bribes. But this widow clearly has no money, which is why she keeps on coming to the court day after day after day, because she has no money to get the judge to do for her what she wants. And so this widow is the picture of a poor and powerless and helpless person who cannot help herself, but rather is at the full mercy of this judge. And what she wants is justice, which we'll cover a bit more later. So that's the widow. Then you have the judge, on the other hand, and man, what a piece of work, this guy. Talk about the sleaziest and the cruelest and the most corrupt guy as you might find in those days. And the reason we know this is because of this phrase that he did not fear God and did not respect man. Now, fearing God, right, as you might know, in the Bible is a very good thing. Fearing the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And in the Old Testament, actually, if you were going to be a judge, fearing God was a prerequisite. AKA, if you did not fear God, you could not be a judge, right? You had to have it before you could go on to be a judge. In part because you need wisdom, but also in part for many other reasons. But another reason why fearing God was important for a judge is because you needed to be accountable to someone so that you weren't just corrupt and did whatever you want, right? And who better to be accountable than God himself? Have you ever heard anyone say that phrase, for God's sake? Now, I know as Christians, we were told, don't ever take God's name in vain, so we would go, oh, for goodness sake, right? But you usually say it when someone is not doing what they're supposed to, and you're like, oh, for goodness sake. Back in the day, they would actually say, for God's sake, and the term was actually coined in the courtroom. And the reason is because if you stood before a judge who was corrupt and sleazy and weren't doing what they're supposed to do, you would then say, for God's sake. And the idea was, I don't care that you are sleazy and you're corrupt and you may not care, but because you fear God and his law, for God's sake, you will do the right thing. That's where that phrase comes from. But this judge does not care. For God's sake, I don't care. I don't fear God, and so I do not care about him at all. Now, respecting man, this is a concept that actually Asian cultures will generally understand better than Western ones. Asian culture, if you don't know, is a shame-based culture. The idea is that we will do anything to make sure that we do not bring shame on ourselves and or our families. You may know of such things. And for some second gens, we have no idea why in the world this is the case, and we don't understand, but that's what it is. Our culture is in many ways all about maintaining our reputation, right? Maintaining our shamelessness. Or we would say maintaining or saving face. You may have heard that. It's why in our culture, classically, if you're mad at someone, the way you're supposed to go handle that is not to go directly up to that person and talk to them. You're supposed to go talk to somebody else and then have that person go talk to them. And the reason is because when you go to tell somebody off and tell them that they blah, 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 all these things, your face is going to also speak something that your words may not be speaking. And then the other person listening to you, their face will also communicate something that they are hearing, but though they may not verbally say it. And so in order to save your face, you then go through another person and that person goes. And so you didn't actually see that person's face and they didn't see yours. That's what this saving face idea is all about. And so in those days, to not respect man quite literally meant that you could not be shamed. You do not feel shame. You don't give a you-know-what's about anything, and you'll just do whatever it is that you want. And so this judge could care less about anything or anyone, including God, and therefore couldn't be swayed or shamed to do anything. He's someone that did whatever it is that he wanted, and because he was a judge, essentially he could do it whenever he wanted. No amount of for God's sake or shame on you would get this judge to do anything other than what he wanted. And so if you're seeing the balance here, it's a classic power struggle, isn't it? It's the powerless widow versus the powerful judge. And so in these stories, you kind of expect to know how this is going to end out, right? The judge is going to do whatever he wants, and he's not going to give her what she wants. Why does he need to? He doesn't. But in the crazy twist of events, and this is the what did Jesus say kind of moment? This sleazy judge, the one who cannot be shamed or swayed, relents and gives the widow what she is asking for. Even though, mind you, he's denied and said no many times, he ends up giving in and going, okay. And so everyone hearing this story back in the day, knowing all this, would be like, what? Why? Why would the judge do such a thing? And to be clear, he's not doing so because all of a sudden he had a change of heart. He wasn't a changed man. It wasn't like, oh my goodness, look at this widow. Look how much she fights for her justice. Okay, I'm changed. Okay, you commit. No, that's not it. There's no change of heart. There's no awakening, none of that stuff. He simply does so because he actually, as you see, he ends up being afraid of this crazy person that he thinks is insane. Look at what he says to himself. He says, even though I do not fear God nor respect any person, again, rephrasing that, I'm not being swayed here. But yet, because this widow is bothering me, I will give her justice. Otherwise, by continually coming, she will wear me out. Now let's break this down because this is kind of how we need to know in terms of what the parable is saying. So the conclusion. Now, this parable, I think, is one of those parables that can be very easily misunderstood, where we can draw incorrect and unfortunate conclusions about the parable. Some people think, and this is not what this means, some people think that this parable is meant to mean that if you just keep pestering God and asking him nonstop, then eventually you will wear God down and he'll give you what you want. Right? Because to be clear, in the parable, right, we, Christians, are the widow, and the God is being compared to the judge. But this is not what this means, because what this means, for one, would mean that then God could be worn down somehow, that he could be manipulated, right? to do and move to do that which that you want him to, that he didn't want to do in the first place. And this would be big, big news, because then it means that though, right, it would go against his character, we could ask God for things that he wouldn't want to give us because it's not his character, it's not good for us. But if we just asked long enough, then he'd be like, fine, stop annoying me, and then give it to you. Now, this may work with your parents for some of you, or if you're a parent, this may have worked on you, but this is not the way it works with God. He cannot be manipulated. That means he wouldn't be God. Okay? And then secondly, another misconclusion we can draw is that this is actually about prayer, but no, it's more about the quality of faith, to which healthy prayer is absolutely critical. So then, knowing these things, the question we have to ask is, okay, then what does this parable mean? What conclusions are we supposed to draw? What's the point? And to get to that, we got to break down parts of this parable, and let's do so. A couple things that we got to break down. First, the judge says, by continually coming, she will wear me out. This, by the way, is the reason why many people think this is about being persistent in prayer, right? Be persistent and then you'll wear God down. No. But wear me out, literally in the Greek, is, interestingly, hit me under the eye. The judge is saying, I will give her legal protection, otherwise, by continually coming to me, she might hit me under my eye. Now, this Greek word is actually a boxing term, interestingly. So the idea is pretty simple. It's literally to punch somebody in the face so that they get a black eye. And black eyes, as you know, are not pretty. You don't want one. And in those days, there was a metaphorical, right, like analogy, right, idea of getting a black eye, that you could make someone look so bad, right, shame them so bad that they have a metaphorical black eye. But as we said here, this isn't the case with the judge. It can't be, because he cannot be shamed or swayed. He doesn't know how to be shamed. So a metaphorical black eye, a stain on his reputation, he doesn't care about. So then you have to actually take this judge quite literally. What he's basically saying is, I'm going to give her what she wants, because you know what? I don't know. She might actually one day throw hands and punch me in my face. Now, I hope we would see that this woman and her character, she wouldn't actually do so. But the woman's commitment, her energy, her urgency to her cause makes the judge think she just might maybe one day punch me in my face if she doesn't get what she wants, so better not take the chance. It's a bit of a David and Goliath moment, if we're just really being honest. The little lonely lady defeats the mighty macho man. And the judge gives her the justice in many ways because he's blown away and in some ways afraid that this little old lady, who should have lost heart a long time ago, somehow seemingly will not lose heart and against all odds keeps fighting for justice. And because of her energy and her commitment and what she is, I'm just going to give her what she wants because I'm afraid of what she might do if I keep on denying her. She believed justice would be done. So that's what this parable is getting at with the widow. Now, the second thing we got to break down. Will not God bring about justice? By asking, will not God, is asking simply, won't he do it? And again, this is a Greek construction. There's a way you can write sentences or questions in Greek, where, as we saw earlier, you can leave it open-ended, where the answer is both. This Greek construction is a question in which it's a rhetorical one. The answer is in and of itself. So if you say, won't he do it? The answer is yes, he will, right? So you write the question where the answer is already in the question. Won't he do it? Why, of course he will, is the idea. Now, in college, to illustrate this, in college I went to a black gospel church for a while. I thought I was, whatever. Anyways, I went for a bit, and often the pastor and the worship leader, right, they'd be talking about the goodness of God and what God would do, his promises, all that kind of stuff, right? And in the middle of worship or in the middle of the sermon, he'd be up here, or she would be up here, and they'd be preaching, and they'd be like, oh, God is good, da-da-da, right? And he's going to be able to do this. And then he would look at everyone, he'd say, family, won't he do it? And the entire congregation would be like, yes, he will. It was like clockwork. It's like they were trained or something. And so what Jesus is asking is, church fam, if this sleazy, no good judge will give justice to this widow, won't God do it? Y'all were supposed to say, yes, he will. You missed the cue. It's okay, we're Korean. It's okay, we'll work on it. If this judge is going to give justice, then you, church, do not lose heart. Why? Because of course God will give justice. Why? Because of course he will. He is our Father. I hope our Father would be better than a sleazy, corrupt judge. And if our Father is such, then won't he do it? Yes, he will. So then third, he says, will that God bring about justice for his elect who cry out day and night? Now, I think most often in this parable, we lose this idea of justice, right? We talk about prayer and the widow and all this stuff, but the point of justice kind of gets lost, right? What the widow is asking for is legal protection. It's literally, do me justice in the Greek. Do me what's right. Do what's just for me. So the question is, will not God do for us, his elect, his chosen people, his church, justice? Yes, he will. And so the parable, to be sure, right? As I said, we are God's people. We are the widow. And so if we're understanding it this way, then the idea is if the widow is a powerless, helpless justice seeker, then we, the church, are also the powerless, helpless justice seekers. And just as this widow is after justice, it's what then we should be after, because it's what we need from God. And then Jesus interestingly says, I will tell you that he will bring about justice for them, the elect, quickly. Well, if all this is true, then the question we have to ask is, what is justice? Oh, sorry, wrong slide. And this is where things get truly weird or flipped upside down or right side up. This is where we will now say, what you thought you knew, you have no idea. Now, the critical sentence in the entire parable is this sentence, will he delay long over them? Right? The whole phrase is, will not God bring justice to his people, and will he delay long over them? And this is the key phrase. Now, just the thing about reading the Bible, if you ever are kind of confused about what you're reading, one thing that you could do is look at a bunch of different translations and see where they differ, because that'll tell you that's where kind of the Greek gets real tricky. Okay, so if you look up this phrase in a bunch of different translations, here's what I found. In the ESV, it's just like the NASB, will he delay long over them? The NIV says, will he keep putting them off, which is a little bit different. KJV says, though he bear long with them, which is interesting, but you get the idea. The NRSV is, will he delay long in helping them? And then the NLT, I don't recommend this version, loses the question altogether and just simply says, he will grant justice to them quickly, which is not the idea at all. So maybe I just told you not to read the NLT. I wouldn't recommend it, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. In the Greek, this phrase literally stands for long suffer over. Will he not long suffer over them is the question. Will he not be patient or forbear or be slow, or in other ways you can translate this word. Now, if you trace the idea of long suffering, forbearing in the Bible, usually what it's related to is this idea of being slow to anger. God is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, right? We hear that in Psalms a lot. So it means to suffer slowly, to delay in one's anger, to be patient rather than getting angry. So then if you read it this way, the question is, will not God bring about justice for his elect who cry day and night? And will not God be slow to anger and suffer long over them? Yes, he will. Now you might be at this point be like, wait a minute, what in the world is going on? If you are, good, because it means you're on the right track. The question we got to ask now is, wait, okay, wait, no. This is not making sense. Okay, let's take a step back, Pastor Pete. Why would God, okay, who is opposite this judge, right? God is not the sleazy judge, he's a righteous God. So why would God be slow to anger and suffer long over his people? And why would he do so if we're talking about justice? Why would he be slow and long-suffering about justice? If he loves us and we're his people, shouldn't he then do justice for us quickly? And he even says that he's going to do quickly. What is going on? It doesn't make any sense. And if you're reading it this way, it shouldn't make any sense. And then you realize that the answer is in the way that we understand justice. Now, one of the interesting things about this passage, another way it's misunderstood, is that people go, wait, Jesus says that he will bring justice quickly. I've been praying for this and that for so long, and God ain't done nothing yet. What in the world is going on? Well, that's all because we don't understand what we're talking about as it pertains to justice. Okay? Now, here's how we understand justice, I think, in the world. If you've ever watched a courtroom show, or what is that show, honey? Law and Order. There you go, Law and Order, whatever. One of those shows, right? About the courtroom. In the way we understand justice is within a courtroom setting, and the way we think about it is in binaries. What it means is 1 and 2. So in the courtroom, right, there is one party that's innocent and one party that's guilty, right? The job of the court is to find which is which. And the way that we understand it is in the courtroom, right, one person is innocent, they're 100% innocent, and the guilty is 100% guilty, right? It's never a mix. Whoever is innocent, they get to go free, right? And then whoever is guilty, well, they usually get locked up in jail, kind of idea. In the case of our parable, if you kind of understand it that way, well, the innocent is the widow, and then whoever she's seeking justice against is the guilty. But let's be honest, in real life, is this ever really the case where in any conflict, any one person is 100% innocent and the other person is 100% guilty? That's very rare. Right? In the home, if you have multiple children, there's never one child who's innocent, the other side's guilty. They all get in trouble. In our house, you might as well not say anything because all of you are going to get in trouble because you have a fault too. That's just kind of how it works. Everybody is a little bit to blame. Even if it's just 10%, you still have some culpability in it. But in the front of a human judge in a courtroom, the idea is find the one who is more innocent than guilty, and then that person's innocent and the other person's guilty. But what happens when the justice we seek is in front of God? Have you ever thought about that? What happens when the justice we seek is in front of a holy and righteous God? Think about it. Isn't it the case that in front of God, the holy and righteous one, every justice seeker, because they're in front of a holy and righteous God, is a sinner and therefore guilty of sin? You following? There is no innocent and guilty, 100% and 100%. Every single person that comes up to the throne room of God and asking God for justice, we're all guilty. Which means that if we're seeking justice, well, then the idea completely changes. The idea is that, hey, find the one that's guilty and find the one that's innocent. The idea is judge the guilty, which is every single person in the room. You see, even if you are seeking justice against someone that did you wrong and are guilty for that sin, if God is righteous and holy, even though that person will be judged for their sin that they wronged you and hurt you with, you will also need to be judged for your sin. And so justice then, isn't it punishing and carrying out the consequence over and against all sin, including mine, the justice seeker? And if God were to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to look over your sin because you're here looking for justice and this person is the quote-unquote worser person, then he wouldn't be God because then he's not just, right? Remember last week we said that if Jesus came in power to judge all evil and bring justice over all, well, that'd be bad news for us because there wouldn't be any of us left to save. So then if we understand justice this way, then all of a sudden we start to realize that we're asking for different things. And when God says, or Jesus says, and he will bring justice about quickly, then what we realize is it happens quickly for the woman and the widow. Why? Because a couple days later, literally, Jesus went to the cross. Are you following? Romans 3 actually illustrates this very, very well. Romans 3, if you want a more detailed breakdown of this, go watch the Good Friday sermon from a couple years ago. I think it's two Good Fridays ago. But let me read this to you and get this idea. This is Paul speaking. He says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Right? We're all sinners, period. Flat out. But we're all justified as a gift by his grace through the redemption which is in Christ Jesus. We're justified by what Jesus did, whom God displayed publicly as a propitiation in his blood through faith. He's talking about the cross. So we're all sinners. We all needed justice and be judged for our sin. But because what Jesus did on the cross publicly in front of everyone, we were justified. We're not dead. This was to demonstrate, Paul says, his righteousness because in the forbearance of God, there's that word, forbearance of God, he passed over the sin previously committed for the demonstration, I say, of his righteousness at the present time so that he would be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Basically what Paul is saying is, look, we all should have been judged from way long ago. But what God did was look over those sins for a while until he put all of the wrath and the judgment on Jesus. And because he did so, we can then find justice. You see, what Jesus did was to long suffer, slow to anger, be patient in his forbearance. He looked over and was patient with our sin until he dealt with it once and for all on the cross. That's the justice this widow is crying out for day and night. Is that what we're crying out for? Or are we crying out that Jesus would do his work on the cross? That to ask for justice is to ask for the cross. Not just for me, but for you, for him, for her, for us, and for them. You see, without God's justice, then we couldn't be God's elect. We wouldn't be his saved people, and we wouldn't be able to cry out for justice in the first place. Because why? We would all be smoke. But the only reason we can seek justice is because God put the justice on Jesus. And that's why when we seek justice, it's for every single person, because that's the forgiveness of sin for all, mine, yours, and ours. You see, church, this is why Jesus says if you have been forgiven, but you can't forgive somebody else, then you actually haven't been forgiven. The idea is, if you see that the reason why you're alive and the reason why we have God is because he's given us justice in Jesus Christ. He's forgiven our sin by dying on the cross, and then you go to him and say, hey, won't you punish this person's sin? Then you don't understand that your sins weren't punished, but they were punished on Jesus. That's the idea. It doesn't make no sense. To cry out for justice is that God would take our sin, put it on Jesus. And then to ask for not the same, but for something different for somebody else, well, then you don't know what God did for you. Justice is Jesus died for me, Jesus died for you, Jesus died for him, Jesus died for her, Jesus died for us, and Jesus died for them. All so that we can all live. And if we receive this justice through grace by faith, then we have salvation. And if you've tasted this fruit, then well, you have life. It's why Jesus says in Matthew 18, that if forgiveness, forgive more times than you can count. Why? Because Jesus forgives you more times than you can count. So let's finish then all of this by returning to the barbecue example, as you probably understood we were going to go there. If you receive this justice, church, it means that you know that Jesus shed his blood so that you and I can live. And if you receive this justice, then through grace, by faith, we have salvation. And if we do, then we've tasted this fruit. And if you've tasted the fruit, it means you have that grace pulsing through your system. And if you do, then you will pray like this widow does. And the prayer is to the point that someone might look at you and think, wait a minute, this person is so amped up about grace and justice that if he or she does not get it, she just might punch something. An urgency and a commitment, a courage to pray for grace, faith, for you, for me, for him, for her, for us, and for them. Now, the reason why I love the barbecue example is because I know a little something about how to actually make good barbecue. I've tried it, it's hard. And the king of Texas barbecue, if you don't know, is brisket. If you don't know what Texas barbecue is, ask your parents to go if you're a student. If not, go. Go to Truth Barbecue downtown, it's the best. It's number 3 in the Texas top 50, whatever. It's amazing. But brisket, not to bore you with the details, it takes anywhere between 9 to 15 to 17 hours to make a good brisket. Okay? That's a lot of time. Just do the math. It's almost a whole day. Okay? I've tried it, but I'm lazy. I have a pellet smoker, which is to say it just does the work for you. It's a set it and forget it type of thing, so it's not a real cook. But anyways, if you remember from back in the pictures, the offset smoker that most big-time places use, that little pit at the end, that's where you put the embers, okay? And the fire goes from there and the smoke wafts through the thing, and that's how you cook it. Well, if we talked about, again, the barbecue pit is faith, right? The fruit is the brisket, the grace is the fire and the smoke, and the prayer is the shovel that brings it from the furnace to the pit, right? That's the idea. Well, if you're cooking a brisket, guess what? If you don't keep praying, if you don't keep shoveling embers into the pit, it'll die. And if you're like, well, then just fill the thing and just light it on fire and let it go. Well, then no, that's not how this works, because a brisket you have to cook at a very low temperature, 200 or 215. Again, that may not make any sense to you. It's not a whole lot of heat. You can put your hand in a 215 thing and you won't burn. That's how not hot it is. Any higher and the brisket won't do its thing. It'll cook too fast. It'll be rubbery and all that kind of stuff. Any lower and it won't really cook. So the whole idea is if you're not literally babying that little pit all night long, continually shoveling it in, if you shovel in too much, then you got to take some out because then the fire will go high and the temperature will go. If you're not doing it all night long, guess what? You got bad brisket. Ain't nobody going to eat it. Brisket is this interesting piece of meat. I know, now we're getting really into the food, right? Where it's like a thin end and a fatty end and there's a whole bunch of tissue in between. You got to cook it real specific and you got to do a whole lot of things. You got to rotate the thing, wrap the thing, spray the thing, fire the thing, all sorts of things. But over the course of 15 hours, you've been continuously praying, not losing heart. It's really easy in the middle of the night, right? Because if you want to cook brisket for someone to eat it at lunch or at dinner, you have to cook through the night. There is no other choice. It's easy to lose heart and stop the praying. Stop feeding the thing. But people who've tasted the fruit, if you've tasted really good brisket, you will never lose heart and you'll keep feeding that thing because you know what it does. If you have the justice and you know it, and you know what it means to be forgiven, and you know what justice is for you, then you will never stop praying for that justice because you've tasted it for yourself. And if you do, church, and you're praying for it day and night, trusting that God will do it, then as we said in the dream, this church will change. There is no doubt about that. But oftentimes, as a church and as people, we lose heart over many things and we stop praying. We get focused on a lot of different things and we stop praying. This is not some message to say, do prayer this way, early morning prayer. No, that's not what I'm talking about. All I'm saying is we need to pray. And if we pray, God will transform us and the city. And the thing you need to pray is that we would receive this justice and that we would want it for the other. Pray over the forgiveness of others who've hurt you. That's why Jesus says, love your enemies. So church, will you dare dream this dream and pray this prayer day and night, seeking justice for all, including the ones who've hurt you? Because Jesus, though we were his enemies, died for us and gave us justice. And will you believe that if you pray, that then God, who loves you, who is your Father, who is greater than any judge, good or sleazy, greater than our human fathers, that indeed he will. That he will give you justice and the world justice. And so, church, we must dream. Won't he do it?
Yes, he will.
Oh, some of you got it that time. But will you dream this with me? We will not be whoever we want to be as a church if we're not praying. Period. Flat out. End of sentence. And so will you then pray for this justice? Will you be like this widow who desperately knows that without this justice, we're nothing. Without God's blood, we are nothing. We don't have life. Oftentimes when you'll hear somebody pray up here, if you'll hear Chris Park pray, he'll say, God, thank you for another day where we can live, another day we can worship you. And that's because he realizes that he has justice. We've gotten the blood of Christ, and that's why we can worship. And if you have it, then you will pray that every single person in here will have the same justice. This thought just came to mind, and I'll end with this. I love all of our students in here, but sometimes they don't pay attention when they talk during sermons, during the song. And our initial reaction is to go to them and say, you better. But I think our heart should be, God, give them justice. That they would know you and they would sing because they've received your grace. Not because someone yells at them who's older and bigger than them. That's what it means to pray this justice day and night and believe. If we are praying, won't he do it? Yes, he will. So will you take some time? I don't know what justice you're seeking. Perhaps it's someone who's hurt you and wronged you. But I pray that your heart would be moved to seek justice for the world, for our church, for everyone, all those who do not know his justice. Perhaps you need to forgive someone because you've been forgiven by Christ. That's justice. Perhaps you need to pray, leaders in here, over your members, that they would know Christ and have that justice. And then will you do so day and night, trusting that he brings justice quickly over his elect? And then will you pray, Lord, find this faith in me. That through that faith and the prayer that's manifested in the faith would then transform our church, our city, and the world. So take some time to pray.